My father smirked as he admitted to draining my entire wedding fund for my sister's extravagant ceremony. He called my career a joke. I didn't scream. I just looked at my fiancé, who quietly unlocked his phone and asked, "Shall we start with the offshore accounts?" This is where the gloves come off, and trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Make sure you're subscribed to catch the rest. We'd love to know, have you ever dealt with a golden child sibling? Tell us in the comments. The exhaustion I felt that Friday evening was not just physical. It was a deep, marrow-level weariness that seemed to hum in my bones. I had spent the last 10 hours on a job site in the blistering July heat, overseeing the installation of a complex terraced garden for a client who changed her mind about hardscaping materials every 45 minutes. My boots were caked in dried mud. My hair was pulled back in a fraying ponytail that had long since surrendered to the humidity, and I could feel the beginnings of a dehydration headache throbbing behind my eyes. But I wasn't allowed to go home, shower, and collapse into the comfortable silence of the apartment I shared with Ethan. No, tonight was mandatory. It was family dinner, a ritual my father, Jonathan, enforced with the rigid authority of a dictator. Attendance was non-negotiable, regardless of how tired I was or how much work Ethan had brought home. We sat around the long, polished mahogany table in my parents' dining room. The air conditioning was set to a frigid 68 degrees, a stark contrast to the heat I'd been working in, and it made the sweat on my back turn clammy and cold. My mother, a woman who viewed silence as a personal failure, was chattering nervously about the floral arrangements for the centerpiece, while my brother, Jason, scrolled through his phone with a bored expression, occasionally letting out a snort of amusement at whatever meme he was consuming. Then there was Vivian. My younger sister sat to my father's right, the seat of honor, always. She was glowing, her manicured hands fluttering in the air as she described, for the third time, the specific shade of blush champagne she needed for her bridesmaids' dresses. "It has to be perfect, Daddy," she whined, pouting slightly. "The venue in Napa is already costing a fortune, and if the dresses don't match the sunset, the photos will be ruined." Ruined. Jonathan smiled at her, a look of indulgent warmth that I rarely saw directed anywhere else. "Don't you worry, princess. We'll make it happen. You know I don't settle for second best." I took a sip of water, trying to wash away the metallic taste of fatigue. "Speaking of weddings," I said, my voice raspier than I intended. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Ethan and I finally got the quote for that barn venue upstate. It's actually under budget, which is great because it leaves us a little extra from Grandma's fund for the catering." The silence that followed my sentence was immediate and heavy. It wasn't the natural pause of conversation. It was a sudden, suffocating vacuum. The clinking of silverware stopped. My mother suddenly found a fascinating spot on the tablecloth to stare at. Jason looked up from his phone, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, and glanced at our father. Jonathan didn't look at me. He picked up his wine glass, swirled the deep red liquid, and took a slow, deliberate sip. "About that, Emilia." My stomach dropped. It was a physical sensation, like missing a step on a staircase in the dark. "About what?" "The fund," Jonathan said, setting the glass down. He finally turned his gaze to me. His eyes were cold, hard flint. "It's been reallocated." I blinked, my brain struggling to process the corporate speak in a family setting. Reallocated. What does that mean? That money was left specifically for me. Grandma's will said. "Grandma left the money to me to distribute as I saw fit for your futures," Jonathan corrected, his voice smooth and practiced. "And frankly, Emilia, we had to make a command decision. Vivian's wedding is going to be a significant social event. It's an investment in the family's image. People from the city, potential investors for the business, they'll all be there." He gestured vaguely at me, taking in my work clothes, my messy hair, my dirt-stained hands. "Your lifestyle doesn't require that level of grandeur. You and Ethan are simple people. You like the outdoors. A backyard barbecue seems more your speed. So we moved the funds to Vivian's budget. She deserves a real wedding." I felt the blood drain from my face. You gave my wedding fund to Vivian, all of it. That was $40,000, Dad. And it's going to pay for the venue and the dress, Vivian chimed in, her voice dripping with a sickening sweetness. She didn't look guilty, she looked triumphant. Honestly, Emilia, you should be happy for me. It's going to be the wedding of the century. Besides, landscape architects don't exactly run in circles that would appreciate a black tie gala, do they? I looked at Ethan. He was sitting perfectly still beside me, his hands resting calmly on the table. His face was unreadable, a mask of polite neutrality he often wore around my family, but I saw the muscle in his jaw jump. Once, twice. You stole from me, I whispered, the reality of it finally piercing through the shock. Watch your tone, Jonathan snapped, his benevolence vanishing instantly. I provided for you your entire life. I put a roof over your head. I am the steward of this family's assets, and I decided that Vivian's wedding takes priority. It's done. The deposit is paid. There is no money left for your little barn party. I looked around the table. My mother refused to meet my eyes. Jason was openly grinning now, enjoying the show. Vivian was inspecting her engagement ring, bored with my reaction, and my father. My father looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain, as if I were a confused child who didn't understand how the world worked. The betrayal was worse than the theft itself. It was the absolute, casual certainty that I didn't matter. The rest of the dinner was a blur of nausea and disbelief. I wanted to storm out, to flip the table, to scream until my throat bled. But I was frozen. It was a coping mechanism I had developed over 2 decades of living in Jonathan and Vivian's shadow. When the hurt was too big, I went numb. I sat there, mechanically pushing peas around my plate, while the conversation moved on as if my father hadn't just confessed to grand larceny over a pot roast. So, Ethan, Jason said, leaning back in his chair and picking his teeth with a fingernail. Still crunching numbers at that firm. What's it called again? Higgins and Associates. Higgins, Miller, and O'Reilly, Ethan corrected softly. His voice was level, void of any aggression. And yes, still crunching numbers. Sounds thrilling, Jason laughed, looking at our father for approval. I don't know how you do it, man, staring at spreadsheets all day. Dad and I were on site at the new luxury condo development downtown today. Real work, you know, building empires, not just counting someone else's pennies. Someone has to ensure the pennies are counted correctly, Ethan said. He took a sip of his water, his eyes locking onto Jason's for a fraction of a second too long. You'd be surprised how often people lose count. Right, Jonathan scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Bookkeeping. It's necessary, I suppose, for the little people. But in the real world, Ethan, you have to take risks. You have to move capital. That's what Emilia doesn't understand. Money isn't static. It flows to where it's needed most. Right now, it's needed to launch Vivian into society properly. By launch, you mean buy her a party she can't afford, I said, the numbness starting to crack. Don't be jealous, Emilia. It's ugly, Vivian sighed, rolling her eyes. Look, if you're that desperate, you can use the leftover flowers from my reception. I'm sure they'll still be fresh enough for whatever thing you're planning. It'll save you a few $100. You're welcome. I felt Ethan's hand find mine under the table. His grip was firm, grounding. It was the only thing keeping me from bursting into tears. I looked at him, pleading silently for us to leave, but he gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Wait, his eyes seemed to say, not yet. That is very generous of you, Vivian, Ethan said aloud. The politeness in his tone was terrifyingly precise. And Jonathan, your perspective on capital flow is certainly unique. I've actually been reading a lot about asset reallocation lately. Have you now? Jonathan asked, clearly not interested. Yes, specifically regarding family trusts and fiduciary duties, Ethan continued. He wasn't eating. He was watching my father with the intensity of a hawk circling a field mouse. But you're right, I'm just a bookkeeper. Details are my life. Sometimes, when you look at the details closely enough, you find patterns that everyone else missed. What are you babbling about? Jason asked, irritated by Ethan's calm. Just work, Ethan smiled. It wasn't his usual warm smile, it was sharp at the edges. We're working on a fascinating case right now, a construction firm, actually. Similar to yours. The owners thought that because they controlled the cash flow, they could treat the company accounts like a personal piggy bank. They forgot that every dollar leaves a digital footprint. The room went quiet again, but this time, the tension was different. It wasn't the awkward silence of my humiliation. It was a sudden, sharp spike of alertness from my father. "Are you implying something, Ethan?" Jonathan asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Me? No," Ethan replied breezily. "Just making conversation. It's boring data entry stuff, right? Nothing a real businessman like you would worry about." But as he said it. I saw the way Jonathan's eyes flickered to Jason. I saw the way Jason stopped slouching and sat up straight. They didn't know what Ethan knew, but for the first time, the absolute arrogance in the room faltered. "Anyway," Ethan said, checking his watch. "Emilia, you look exhausted. We should probably head out. We have a lot of planning to do. Since our budget has been adjusted, we'll need to get creative." "Yes," Jonathan said a little too quickly. "Go, get some rest. And Emilia, stop pouting. It's unbecoming." As we walked to the car, the night air felt heavy and suffocating. I didn't speak until we were safely inside our modest sedan, the doors locked, the engine idling. "They took everything, Ethan," I sobbed, finally letting the tears fall. $40,000. Grandma meant that for me. She told me before she died. She knew Dad would try something like this, that's why she made a specific trust, but she made him the trustee because she thought he would respect the law. Ethan put the car in gear but didn't pull away yet. He turned to me, and in the dashboard lights, I saw a look on his face I had never seen before. It was a cold, calculating fury, but it was controlled, focused like a laser. "They think I'm just a data entry clerk, Emilia," he said quietly. "They think I file tax returns for mom-and-pop bakeries. They've forgotten one crucial thing." "What?" I sniffled, wiping my eyes. "They forgot that people who commit fraud usually get sloppy when they think no one is watching," he whispered. "And I have been watching for a very, very long time." To understand why this betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand my grandmother, Rose. She was the only person in my family who saw me. While Jonathan and my mother fawned over Vivian's pageants and Jason's mediocre football career, Grandma Rose would find me in the garden, knees deep in soil, propagating hydrangeas. She was the one who encouraged me to study landscape architecture. She told me that creating something that lived and grew was noble work, unlike the soul-sucking monuments to ego my father built. When she passed, she left a substantial estate. Most of it went to Jonathan, naturally. But she had pulled me aside a week before she died, her hands frail and papery in mine. "I've set aside a nest egg for you, Emmy," she had wheezed. "For your wedding or a house. Something just for you. Your father is to hold it until you're ready. Promise me you'll use it to build a life that makes you happy, not one that impresses the neighbors." I promised, and for 5 years, I worked. I worked for my father's company for the first 3 years, designing the landscaping for his condo complexes for a fraction of the market rate. I did it out of loyalty. I saved them tens of thousands of dollars in contractor fees. I worked 16-hour days to meet his impossible deadlines, only to have him critique the curvature of a retaining wall or complain that the shrubs looked cheap. I eventually left to start my own small firm, a move that Jonathan took as a personal insult. "You're abandoning the family," he had spat. "Ungrateful." Since then, the dynamic had solidified. Jonathan was the emperor, ruling his construction empire with an iron fist and flexible ethics. He was a man who believed that rules were suggestions for people who couldn't afford lawyers. He wore Italian suits, drove a new Mercedes every year, and spoke loudly in restaurants. Appearance was his currency. Vivian was his masterpiece. At 24, she had never held a full-time job. She was an influencer with a modest following, funded entirely by the bank of Dad. She was beautiful, yes, but it was a manicured, surgical kind of beauty. She viewed people as props in her life movie. If you weren't advancing her plot, you were in the way. And then there was Jason. At 27, he was the heir apparent. He had our father's arrogance but none of his terrifying competence. He was the VP of operations, a title that mostly involved taking clients to strip clubs and signing off on invoices he didn't read. He treated me with a sneering condescension, calling me the gardener whenever his friends were around. But the real antagonist, the puppeteer behind the scenes, was Jonathan's overwhelming need for control. The morning after the dinner, the reality of our situation set in. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at a spreadsheet of our wedding budget. Without the trust fund, we were in the red. Deeply. "I can pick up extra shifts," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "Maybe if we cut the guest list to just 50. Ethan walked into the kitchen. He was dressed for work, wearing a sharp gray suit that my family usually mocked as middle management attire. He carried a leather briefcase that he treated with immense care. "We aren't cutting the guest list, Amelia," he said, pouring himself a black coffee. "And you aren't working yourself to death." "Ethan, we have to be realistic. The money is gone. Jonathan isn't going to give it back. He's probably already wired it to the wedding planner." Ethan sat down opposite me. He placed his briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. He didn't pull out a sandwich or a newspaper. He pulled out a thick, color-coded file folder. "Do you know what I actually do, Amelia?" he asked. "You're a forensic accountant," I said. "You audit companies." "I'm a senior forensic investigator for the state," he corrected gently. "I specialize in high-level construction fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. My department doesn't just audit. We build criminal cases." My mouth fell open slightly. You never told me it was that high level." "I couldn't, it's sensitive work. And frankly, it was better that your family thought I was a nobody. It made them careless around me." He opened the file. "For the last 3 years, every time we went to dinner, every time Jason bragged about creative accounting, every time your dad mentioned a cash job or a vendor kickback, I took notes. Mental notes at first. Then I started looking at public records." He slid a document across the table. It was a photocopy of a permit application for one of my father's buildings, but it was covered in Ethan's handwriting in red ink. "Jonathan has been underreporting income for a decade," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But recently, he got greedy. He's been moving assets into shell companies to hide them from creditors and the IRS. And that wedding fund, he didn't just reallocate it. The way he moved that money. If he touched the trust improperly, that's wire fraud. That's a federal crime." He looked at me, his eyes burning with a protective intensity that made my heart ache. "He stole your future to pay for a party, Amelia. He thinks he's untouchable because he's rich and loud. But he's about to find out that the quiet guy in the corner has been building a cage around him, bar by bar." Ethan tapped the file. "I have enough here to trigger an audit that will freeze every account he has. But I want to know what you want to do. If we pull this trigger, there is no going back. The business, the house, Vivian's wedding, it all burns down." I looked at the file. I thought about Grandma Rose. I thought about the way Vivian smiled when she told me to use her leftover flowers. I thought about my father's face when he said I wasn't worth a real wedding. "Burn it," I said. The decision to burn my family's world down wasn't made in a fit of rage. It was a cold, calculated choice born of a lifetime of dismissal. As I sat there staring at Ethan's file, a strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a storm front finally breaking. "Show me," I said, my voice steady. Ethan opened the folder fully. Inside wasn't just a collection of random papers. It was a meticulous roadmap of my father's financial sins. Spreadsheets with highlighted rows, printouts of public property records, and even photographs of luxury cars parked in driveways of houses owned by shell companies. "This is just the surface, Amelia," Ethan explained, his finger tracing a line on a bank statement. "See these transfers. Consulting fees to a company called Vandalay Holdings in the Caymans. They happen every quarter, right after a major project wraps up. It's classic skimming. He's pulling profit out of the company tax-free and hiding it offshore." "And the wedding fund?" I asked, my heart pounding. "That's where he got sloppy," Ethan said, a grim smile touching his lips. He transferred the entire $40,000 directly from the trust account, which is a separate legal entity, into his personal checking, and then immediately wired a deposit to the Napa venue. He didn't even try to launder it. He treated a trust like a piggy bank. That's piercing the corporate veil, Amelia. It's theft, plain and simple. And because he used wire transfers, it's federal wire fraud. But how do we prove it? It's his word against ours. Not exactly, Ethan said, pulling out a USB drive. I need access to one more thing to make this bulletproof. I need the actual internal ledgers. The ones Jason keeps on that laptop he never lets out of his sight. The ones that show the cash payments to undocumented workers and the bribes to inspectors. Jason's laptop, I laughed humorlessly. He sleeps with that thing. Does he take it to the site visits? Ethan asked. Always. He pretends to work on it in the trailer while the crew actually builds. Perfect, Ethan said. You still have keys to the main office trailer, don't you? From when you did the landscaping for the Riverview project. I nodded slowly. I do. I kept a set because sometimes I need to check the irrigation controls on weekends. Next Tuesday is the site inspection for Riverview, Ethan said, his eyes gleaming. Jason will be distracted schmoozing the city inspectors, if you can get into that trailer for 10 minutes. I can get the files, I finished for him. A thrill of adrenaline shot through me. I wasn't just the victim anymore. I was the operative. Tuesday arrived with a suffocating humidity. I drove to the Riverview construction site under the pretense of checking the new sod installation. The site was buzzing with activity. My father was there, wearing a pristine hard hat that had never seen a scratch, loudly directing a crane operator who clearly knew more than he did. Jason was by the trailer, laughing with a city inspector, a thick envelope visibly protruding from his back pocket. I parked my truck near the equipment shed, grabbed my clipboard and a soil moisture probe, and walked onto the site. No one paid me any mind. To them, I was just the gardener, part of the scenery. I waited until Jason led the inspector toward the unfinished pool area, his loud voice booming about imported Italian tile. My father was busy berating a foreman near the entrance. The trailer was unattended. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slipped the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth click. I was inside. The air conditioning in the trailer was blasting. Jason's desk was a chaotic mess of blueprints, takeout containers, and energy drink cans. And there, sitting amidst the debris, was his laptop. It was open. He hadn't even locked the screen. My hands shook as I plugged in the USB drive Ethan had given me. It was preloaded with a script that would copy specific file types, QuickBooks backups, Excel sheets, PDFs in seconds. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 20%, 45%. 70%. Outside, I heard heavy footsteps on the metal stairs. Yeah, just grab the permits from my desk. Jason's voice drifted through the thin metal door. Panic seized me. I yanked the USB drive out at 92%. It would have to be enough. I shoved it into my bra and grabbed a stack of landscape plans from the side table just as the door swung open. Jason froze in the doorway, the inspector behind him. His eyes narrowed. Amelia. What the hell are you doing in here? Checking the irrigation specs, I lied smoothly, holding up the blueprints. The pressure regulators you installed are wrong. If I don't fix them, the new sod will be dead by Friday. Jason scoffed, relaxing. Jesus, you scared me. Don't sneak around. And fix the damn sprinklers, whatever. Just don't bill me for overtime. Wouldn't dream of it, I said, brushing past him. My knees were shaking so hard I could barely walk, but I kept my head high. As I walked back to my truck, I felt the cool plastic of the USB drive against my skin. It felt like a loaded gun. That evening, Ethan and I sat in our living room, the stolen data displayed on our TV screen. It was worse than we thought. Look at this, Ethan pointed to a spreadsheet titled MISC Expenses Cash. He's paying the inspector $5,000 a month. That's bribery of a public official. And here, he's listing materials as high-grade lumber, but the invoices show he's buying substandard wood from a discount supplier. That's fraud and a safety violation. And the wedding money? I asked quietly. Here, He clicked another file. A direct transfer from the Rose Estate Trust to Vivian Wedding Napa. No loan agreement, no promissory note, just theft. We have everything, I breathed. We do, Ethan confirmed. But before we go to the authorities, we give them one chance to make it right. Not for their sake, but for yours, so you can look them in the eye and know you tried. We arranged a family meeting for Friday night. My parents were reluctant, complaining that it interfered with Vivian's dress fitting, but I insisted it was about the wedding budget and that I had found a solution. They arrived at our small apartment with an air of impatient condescension. Vivian didn't even sit down, she paced around our living room, critiquing our furniture. This sofa is quaint, she sniffed. But really, Emilia, velvet is so 2019. Jonathan sat in my armchair like a king on a throne. Make it quick, Emilia. We have reservations at Le Bernardin at 8. This won't take long, I said, standing by the TV. Ethan stood next to me, silent and watchful. I know about the trust fund, I began. I know you didn't just reallocate it, you stole it. Oh, for God's sake, my mother sighed, checking her watch. Are we still on this? It's family money, Emilia. Your father decides where it goes. Actually, the law decides, Ethan spoke up. His voice was calm, but it cut through the room like a knife. It was an irrevocable trust. Jonathan was the trustee, not the owner. Moving that money for personal use is a felony. Watch your mouth, boy, Jonathan growled, his face turning red. You're a glorified calculator. You don't know the first thing about how the world works. I know how forensic accounting works, Ethan said. He picked up a remote and clicked a button. The TV screen flickered to life, displaying the spreadsheet from Jason's laptop, the one showing the bribes to the inspector. The silence in the room was absolute. Jason, who had been leaning against the wall looking bored, suddenly went pale. He recognized his own file. Where did you get that? Jason whispered. Does it matter? Ethan asked. We have the bank records, Jonathan. We have the invoices for the substandard materials. We have the wire transfers to the Caymans. And we have the proof that you drained Emilia's trust fund to pay for a party. Jonathan stood up, his fists clenched. You hacked my company. I'll have you arrested for corporate espionage. I wouldn't call the police if I were you, Ethan said, not flinching. Because if you do, the first thing they'll look at is why you have 2 sets of books, one for the IRS and one for yourself. You're bluffing, Vivian shrieked. Daddy, tell him he's bluffing. He's just jealous, because I'm getting married in Napa, and Emilia is getting married in a barn. Shut up, Vivian. Jason snapped, his voice cracking. He looked at our father with wide, terrified eyes. Dad, that's the real ledger, the one with the inspector payments, if that gets out. Jonathan looked from the screen to Ethan, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes, but his ego wouldn't let him fold. Not yet. You think you can blackmail me? Jonathan sneered, trying to regain his composure. You think a few spreadsheets scare me? I have lawyers who eat people like you for breakfast. You're nothing. You're a nobody. I'm a senior investigator for the State Financial Crimes Division, Ethan said softly. The color drained from Jonathan's face so fast it looked like he might faint. What? I investigate fraud for a living, Jonathan, Ethan continued. And right now, I'm looking at a textbook case of embezzlement, tax evasion, and bribery. You have 2 choices. You return Emilia's money, every cent with interest, by tomorrow morning, or I file my report. You wouldn't, my mother gasped, clutching her pearls. You would send your own father to prison. He's not my father, Ethan said coldly, and he stole from my fiancé. He's my father, I said, stepping forward. And he didn't care about me when he took my future to buy Vivian a dress, so why should I care about his? This is ridiculous, Vivian screamed, stomping her foot. I need that money. The deposit is non-refundable. You're ruining my wedding. Your wedding is already ruined, Vivian, I said, because it was paid for with stolen money, and if Dad goes to prison, who is going to pay for the rest of it? The ultimatum hung in the air like toxic smoke. We gave them 24 hours. They didn't pay. Instead, the next morning, I received a call from a lawyer I didn't know. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, representing Jonathan and the family trust. His voice was oily and patronizing. "Ms. Amelia," he purred, "your father is very distressed by your threats. He is willing to offer you a settlement, $5,000 cash today. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement and return all unauthorized data you may possess." 5,000. I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. He stole 40,000 plus interest, and he thinks he can buy my silence for 5. It is a generous offer, considering the criminal liability you face for data theft, Sterling said, his tone sharpening. We are prepared to file charges against you and your fiancé for hacking and extortion. Go ahead, I said and hung up. I looked at Ethan. They aren't going to pay. They think they can bully us. Then we proceed, Ethan said. He picked up his phone. I'm calling my director. The next few days were a blur of activity. Ethan officially recused himself from the case to avoid a conflict of interest, but he handed over his tip and the initial evidence to a colleague, Agent Miller. Miller was a bulldog of a woman who had put away 3 mayors for corruption. She took one look at the file and smiled. "This is beautiful," she said. "The stupidity is almost poetic." While the investigation quietly spun up, my family went on the offensive. Vivian launched a social media campaign, posting vague, tearful videos about jealous family members trying to sabotage her happiness. She didn't name me, but the comments were filled with vitriol directed at the bitter sister. My mother called me 10 times a day, leaving voicemails that ranged from sobbing guilt trips, "How can you do this to your own flesh and blood?" to screaming rage, "You are dead to us." But the worst was Jason. He showed up at my work site. I was overseeing the installation of a koi pond when I saw his truck screech to a halt on the curb. He jumped out, his face twisted in fury. "You bitch!" he screamed, marching across the lawn. My crew stopped working, watching warily. "You think you're so smart, stealing my laptop data." "I didn't steal anything, Jason," I said calmly, gripping my shovel. "I just copied the truth." "You have no idea who you're messing with," he yelled, getting in my face. "Dad knows people, powerful people. You think a little audit is going to stop us? We'll bury you in legal fees until you're homeless." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It's a promise." He spat. "You return that drive or you'll regret it. You're nothing without us. Just a gardener playing pretend." "Get off my job site," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Make me," he sneered, shoving me backward. That was a mistake. One of my crew members, a burly guy named Tomas, stepped forward, his hand on a heavy wrench. "Is there a problem here, boss?" Jason looked at Tomas, then at the rest of the crew who were slowly gathering around. His bravado crumbled. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing away. "You're going to pay for this." "I think you're the one who's going to pay, Jason," I called after him. "And tell Dad his inspector friend might want to lawyer up." That night, Agent Miller called Ethan. "We have enough for a warrant," she said. "We're executing a search of the business offices and the residence tomorrow morning. We want to freeze the accounts before they can move any more assets." "Do it," Ethan said. "Wait," I said, a thought forming in my mind. "Tomorrow is Saturday. They're having an engagement party for Vivian at the country club. Everyone will be there. The investors, the business partners, the inspector." Ethan looked at me. "You want them to do it there?" "If we do it at the office, they can spin it," I said. "They can say it's a routine audit, but if the feds walk into the engagement party, there's no spinning that. It ends the charade." "It's ruthless," Ethan said, a look of admiration in his eyes. "They wanted a show," I said, thinking of my father's smirk at the dinner table. "Let's give them one." The engagement party at the Riverbend Country Club was exactly what Vivian had dreamed of: opulent, excessive, and painfully loud. A string quartet played near the entrance, battling for dominance over the chatter of 200 guests. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My father held court near the open bar, a glass of expensive scotch in one hand, while my mother fluttered around him, accepting compliments on Vivian's perfect match to a wealthy junior partner at a law firm. I wasn't invited, of course, but I was there. Ethan and I stood near the back of the ballroom, watching. We weren't dressed for a gala. I wore my work boots and jeans. Ethan was in his standard gray suit. We looked like crashers, and the whispers started the moment we walked in. "What is she doing here?" I heard a cousin hiss. "Disgraceful," another muttered. My father spotted us immediately. His face went purple with rage. He excused himself from a conversation with the city councilman and stormed over, Jason flanking him like a bodyguard. "Get out," Jonathan snarled, keeping his voice low but venomous. "You weren't invited. This is Vivian's night. Don't you dare ruin this with your petty jealousy." "We're not here for the cake, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "Then leave," Jason hissed, stepping forward aggressively, "or I'll have security throw you out." "Actually," Ethan interjected, stepping between me and Jason. He pulled his badge from his jacket pocket and let it hang from its chain. "You might want to hold off on that call." The color drained from Jason's face. He knew what that badge meant. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian's voice rang out from the stage, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the corner. She tapped a microphone, beaming. "Thank you all for coming. Daddy has a special announcement." Jonathan glared at us one last time. "We will deal with you later," he spat, then turned and plastered a fake smile on his face as he walked toward the stage. "My beautiful daughter." Jonathan boomed into the microphone, wrapping an arm around Vivian. The crowd applauded politely. "Tonight, we celebrate not just a union of hearts, but a union of families. And as a token of my love, I'm proud to announce that the wedding will be fully funded by the family trust, ensuring Vivian gets the fairy tale she deserves." The applause grew louder. Vivian squealed and hugged him, my mother dabbed at her eyes. "That trust was for both of us," I shouted, my voice cut through the room like a gunshot. The applause died instantly. Jonathan froze. He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock and fury. "Security," he roared, "remove her." "It's true," I yelled, walking toward the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, murmuring in confusion. "Grandma Rose left that money for both her granddaughters. You stole my share, Dad. You forged the documents and drained the account to pay for this sham." "She's lying," Vivian screamed, grabbing the microphone. "She's just jealous because she's a gardener and I'm marrying a lawyer. She's pathetic." "Am I?" asked, stopping at the foot of the stage. I pulled a sheaf of papers from my jacket, copies of the bank transfers Ethan had found. "Here are the wire transfers, Dad. $40,000 moved from the trust to your personal account on July 12th. And here is the deposit to the Napa venue, made on July 13th. You didn't even try to hide it." "Those are fake," Jonathan shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "You forged those." "And what about these?" Ethan's voice rang out from behind me. He held up a tablet, displaying the spreadsheet from Jason's laptop. "These are your internal ledgers, Jonathan, the ones showing the bribes to the building inspector. The ones detailing the tax evasion on the Riverview project. The ones listing the offshore accounts." The room went deathly silent. Every eye turned to Jonathan. You hacked my company." Jonathan sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at Ethan. "That's illegal." "Actually," a new voice boomed from the entrance. "It's evidence." We all turned. Standing in the doorway were Agent Miller and 4 uniformed officers from the state police, along with 2 IRS agents. "Jonathan Miller," Agent Miller announced, her voice calm and authoritative. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and bribery of a public official. We are also seizing all assets related to Miller Construction and the Rose Estate Trust." Pandemonium erupted. Guests gasped and scrambled away from my family as if they were contagious. My mother let out a strangled cry and collapsed into a chair. Vivian dropped the microphone, her face a mask of pure horror. "No," Jonathan screamed as the officers moved in. "You can't do this. I'm a pillar of this community. I built this town." "And you robbed it blind," Agent Miller said coolly as an officer clicked handcuffs onto his wrists. Jason tried to slip away toward the kitchen exit, but 2 officers blocked his path. "Jason Miller," one said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and aiding and abetting." "I didn't do anything," Jason wailed as they cuffed him. "I just did what he told me. It was his idea." "Tell it to the judge," the officer said, dragging him away. I stood there in the center of the ballroom, watching my father and brother being led away in disgrace. The guests were filming with their phones. The perfect engagement party had become a crime scene. Vivian stood alone on the stage, sobbing hysterically. Her fiancé, the lawyer, was already on his phone, looking at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. He walked away without a word. My mother looked at me, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Emilia," she whispered, "how could you? We are your family." "No, Mom," I said quietly, feeling a profound sense of release. "You were my captors, and I just set myself free." I turned to Ethan. He took my hand, his grip warm and solid. "Let's go home," I said. My father's arrest made the front page of the local paper for a week. The pillar of the community crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The audit revealed that he had been skimming millions for over a decade. The business was seized, its assets frozen and then liquidated to pay back taxes and fines. The family home, the one my mother was so proud of, was foreclosed on. Jonathan and Jason both took plea deals. Jonathan got 8 years in federal prison for the fraud and embezzlement. Jason, thanks to his cooperation, he sang like a canary the moment they put him in an interrogation room, got 2 years and probation. Vivian's wedding was canceled, obviously. Her fiancé broke up with her the day after the arrest, citing irreconcilable differences, which everyone knew meant, "I don't date felons' daughters." With no income and no daddy to pay her bills, she had to move into a small apartment with 3 roommates and actually get a job at a retail store. The last I heard, she was still posting on Instagram, trying to spin her downfall as a journey of self-discovery, but her follower count had plummeted. My mother moved into a small condo paid for by her sister. She still calls me sometimes, crying about how unfair it all is, how I destroyed the family. I don't answer. I blocked her number weeks ago. As for the money, the court ruled that the trust fund had been illegally accessed. Because the assets were seized, I was considered a victim of the fraud. It took 6 months of legal wrangling, but eventually, I received a restitution check for the full $40,000, plus interest. Ethan and I didn't have a big wedding. We used a portion of the money to pay off the last of his student loans and put a down payment on a small farmhouse with 5 acres of land, a fixer-upper with good bones and endless potential for gardens. We got married in the backyard of that house on a crisp October afternoon. There were no designer dresses, no ice sculptures, no society photographers. Just 20 of our closest friends, Ethan's wonderful parents, and my crew from work. I wore a simple white sundress and held a bouquet of wildflowers I'd grown myself. During the reception, as we sat around a fire pit roasting marshmallows, Ethan leaned over and kissed my temple. "Happy?" he asked. I looked around at the laughter, the warmth, the genuine love that surrounded us. There was no pretense here, no lies, no one trying to impress anyone else, just real people building a real life. "Yeah," I smiled, leaning into him. "I am." I thought about my father sitting in a cell, stripped of his suits and his ego. I thought about Vivian scanning items at a register. And I realized that for the first time in my life, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad, I just felt light. The garden around us was dormant for the winter, but I knew that come spring, it would bloom. And this time, it would be my garden, my rules, my life. And that was worth more than any trust fund.